Hey everybody, welcome back. When we left off last time, World War One had kicked off, the Great War. And World War One was very unique for many reasons. Um, Trench warfare certainly made World War One unique, and the stalemate, neither side being able to gain any ground. New weapons that were very deadly, machine guns, tanks, poison gas. Um, the casualties are going to be staggering and more than anybody could have anticipated or comprehend. So the Allies are hanging in there. They're holding out, hoping that the United States will join in. Our president, of course, is trying to keep us out of this conflict. He wants us to be neutral. So this section will look at some of the steps that take us closer to the conflict until finally President Wilson has to go to Congress and ask for a declaration of war in April of 1917. And then our troops will be headed over there, over there. U.S. neutrality. Well, yeah, the outbreak of war probably surprised a lot of Americans. And even though our president was keeping us neutral, it was hard for us to be neutral because more than likely people had chosen a side. You know, for one reason or another, you might support the Allies or you might support the Central Powers. But for most people back home, we supported the Allies. The Allies we just simply had more connections with. We have a longer partnership with the British. The French had helped us during our American Revolution. So it was hard for us not to choose a side. And there were probably some steps that we are taking at this point that show that if we're going to join in, we're probably going to help out the Allies. So even though we're neutral, doesn't mean we're not untouched by the war. The British Navy had blockaded Germany, so that's going to affect our ships. The Germans, of course, respond with a war zone around Britain, and they give a warning to all ships. If you enter that zone, you could be subject to a U-boat attack. The U-boats are the German submarines, the untersea boats, but we will call them U-boats. And German aggression became very clear with the sinking of the British passenger ship, the Lusitania. And with the sinking of this ship, we lose over 100 Americans also. So President Wilson has to issue an ultimatum to stop sinking civilian ships. That ultimatum, however, leads to an or else. And if the Germans don't stop sinking ships, what are we going to do about it? So that ultimatum didn't go over very well with our Secretary of State. And we'll look at some more events that get us closer to this conflict. Germany apparently didn't listen to the ultimatum because they do continue unrestricted warfare. So President Wilson tries something else. We're going to cut diplomatic ties. No more talking about it, no more negotiating, no more diplomacy. Germany backs off a little bit with the Sussex Pledge. And at this point, it still appears that people back home are in support of President Wilson and his decision to stay neutral. Most Americans support him. Now, there is one American, former President Teddy Roosevelt. He's not real happy. He calls out Wilson, calls him a coward. Teddy Roosevelt not only wanted us to be in this war, he wanted us to be leading the charge in this war. So President Wilson certainly had his share of critics, even while trying to keep us neutral. We have a new Secretary of State at this point, and again, we're a neutral country, but we are trading. So our trade primarily focused on trade with the Allies. So for a neutral country, I can't really say that we're completely neutral. Another act that gets us closer to thinking about war, the National Defense Act. We're going to increase the size of our military at this point. And again, for a country that claims to be neutral, it's hard to really claim that we're completely neutral when we are launching a military preparedness program and increasing the size of our military. It's time for an election, 1916, and at this point, yes, President Wilson had kept us out of war. So that is his campaign slogan. He kept us out of war. But apparently the Germans are going to forget about their promise in the Sussex Pledge, and U-boat warfare picks up again. One more event, the Zimmerman Note. This note between Mexico and Germany talks about a possible alliance. And at this point, we talked about the war being over there in Europe. But if we're talking about a German-Mexico alliance, that brings the war closer to home for us. So for President Wilson, neutrality is no longer an option. He goes before Congress, asks for a declaration of war. Our Congress is going to vote for the United States to go to war. And in Wilson's speech, of course, he defends it. The world must be made safe for democracy. So our troops are going to be headed over there. And they're going to get a warm welcome in France because, the Allies are holding out as long as possible. They need fresh troops as quickly as possible over there. So now that we have officially declared war, the National Defense Act isn't quite enough. We have to kick it up a notch with the Selective Service Act. And the Selective Service Act is a draft. So young men will be drafted into the military. And the draft was supposed to build a more democratic United States, but our military will be very segregated for a very long time. Training camps built quickly, soldiers trained as quickly as possible. The use of the bayonet, going to be an important skill. The tossing of a grenade, going to be an important skill. Our recruits have to go through medical examinations, and yes, they spend a lot of time learning how to fight. And it won't be long before they are sent over there, over there. Send the word, send the word. So once our U.S. troops are trained, they are off. They are headed to France. They are part of the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. And General John Blackjack Pershing is their leader. And Pershing, of course, is the name I'm sure you remember because he was on the hunt to capture Pancho Villa in Mexico. Pershing had one main directive for his troops, though. They weren't going to be separated over there. They were going to fight together. They were trained together. They were going to fight together. In addition to our men who are being sent over there, we have thousands of women who helped work in hospitals. They volunteered for the Red Cross and the YMCA. So men and women serving over there during the Great War. Our merchant vessels are going to transport troops and supplies and the volunteers, and they're escorted by warships. And we call this the convoy system. And I would say the convoy system was especially successful because we didn't lose anybody as we were sending our troops over there. Oh, here's my favorite, Frank Buckles. This young man enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1917 when he was only 16 years old. And at that point, the United States wasn't even fighting in the war, but he thought it was his duty to serve. So he falsified some of his documents so that he could enlist, and he fought with the French. He drove an ambulance to help out in the war effort, even before the United States joined the war. And he was our last surviving U.S. World War I veteran. He passed away in 2011. He was over 110 years old. Thank you, Frank Buckles, for serving our country. Next section, we will head back home. Section 3 looks at what's going on at home, how people at home are helping out the United States in one way or another. So for next time, please read Section 3 and look at how we help out the war effort from home. And in the meantime, wash your hands, social distance, and stay well.